Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. Every 4 months I look back upon my journey into fantasy, which I started in January of 2023. What progress did I make? Are there any outliers or disappointments that deserve mentioning? Did my TBR shrink somewhat? In short, how is my journey coming along? I always compare the state of my bookshelves, holding the books I want to read versus the books I have already read, with how they looked like 4 months earlier. But before I will show you those, let me first tell you that I'm still extremely satisfied with this journey. Before 2023, I read mainly literature, and I noticed that I read less and less books each year. On average, I would read about 30 books, but in 2022, for instance, the tally stopped at 21. With the boost of fantasy, and no doubt also stimulated by starting this YouTube channel in April of 2023, I more than doubled that number. My enjoyment in reading has picked up tremendously, and I am very eager to read the many books on my TBR without exception. About 1 month before making my last update at the end of April, I started my Read What You Own challenge. Since starting this challenge, I have only bought 3 new books, which will appear on my final shelf, number 7. This means that I can go through my TBR shelves relatively quickly. After we've browsed through all of my shelves, I'll run the numbers by you. This is shelf number 1 in my TBR bookcase, which, by the way, can hold all my books again. I'll highlight the books and series I am most eager to start reading, starting with First Law by Joe Abercrombie. It really is high time I started reading this much praised series. The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, which I hope to be a short and light read in between my Stormlight archive reads. And the Empire series by Raymond E. Feist and Janny Wurts. Shelf number 2. Whenever I will begin with the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, I really couldn't say. Legend by David Gemmell is higher on my list, so I will probably pick that one up very soon. Shelf number 3. On the left, hidden in the shadow, are the books of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read the first 3 books in a Dutch translation when I was young. These books are also planned as in-betweens of Stormlight books. I'd hoped to read The Life-Ship Traders by Robin Hobb this year, but I'm afraid my Sanderson plans will push them toward next year. I don't regard these big books as palate cleansers. Perhaps the Redwall books by Brian Jake are. We'll see. At this moment I am finishing the Fionavar Tapestry Trilogy by Gavriel K., so I'll probably continue reading his other works in 2025. After my DNF of George MacDonald's Phantastes, which is in my other bookcase, I want to find out if The Princess and the Goblin from him is more to my liking. The other books will simply have to wait for less busy reading times. On the 5th shelf there is only Terry Pratchett's Discworld, except for the 3 Kingkiller Chronicle books on the right. I believe I will be reading at least Equal Rights, Mort and Sorcerer this year. They are perfect books to cleanse my reading palette from you-know-what. This next shelf will change because the 3 Stormlight novels and the novella will be devoured these coming months. I'm also very hungry for the first 3 Drizzt novels by R.A. Salvatore. I forgot to put Homeland in the right position so you could see its back before taking this picture. Oh well, you probably know how it looks. Other than that, I want to start with Jen Williams and continue with Michael J. Sullivan, but chances are that won't happen in the remaining months of 2024. On the final TBR shelf are my only additions for this update. Even though I was not allowed to because of my challenge, I still went ahead and bought the first trilogy by Janny Wurts, The Cycle of Fire. After I had read her debut, The Sorcerer's Legacy, I simply couldn't resist. Even though I will not be reading those this year. The other series on this shelf I cannot wait to get to is Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Tad Williams. Heard so many raving things about these books. So let's jump right into the shelves in my other bookcase where I keep the fantasy books I have read. Thankfully, these pictures will show more changes. On the first shelf I removed Clockwork Angels by Neil Peart and Kevin J. Anderson. A wonderful book, but I removed it because, for whatever reason, I thought it should live beside the other Neil Peart books in another bookcase in my apartment. New here are the first 3 books in the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown and Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. The last one is one of the best books I've read this year so far. I will put a link to all the videos I did on books that are new in this bookcase in the description box down below. The next shelf has no new books on it, as well as shelf number 3. I plan on releasing a video on the 4 Hidden World novels by William Horwood sometime the coming months. I'm working on the script as we speak. New on shelf number 4 is A Memory of Light, the final book in the memorable Wheel of Time series. This series will always be special to me, even though I had some issues with it. Also new are the 3 books in the Fionavar Tapestry by Gavriel. I've almost finished reading The Darkest Road, the final book, so I took the liberty of putting it in this picture already. More on that series in a future video, of course. The Light Fantastic is one of 2 editions on this shelf. I really enjoyed the second book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld. The other new book here is the George MacDonald Fantasy Collection. I am interested in the origins of this genre, so every now and then I read some very old works. So far with little success. Fantastis, the first and I believe most famous work by MacDonald, was a drag, I'm sorry to say. I managed to plough my way through about 70 to 80 pages until I gave up. To me it was quite terrible and hopelessly outdated in almost every aspect. I have 2 more shorter works of this writer, which I will try, although my hopes are not very high, to be honest. On the next 3 smaller shelves, 2 Brandon Sandersons have joined the others that were there already. Warbreaker and The Way of Kings, my first acquaintance with the Stormlight archive. Now that you've had a peek inside my fantasy bookcases, let's see what this amounts to in numbers. My fantasy TBR shelves hold 186 titles, and on the other shelves there are 137 books that I have read. In theory, that would mean that of a total of 323 fantasy books in my possession, I read more than 42%. But as I'm counting from when I started this journey for real, January 13, 2023 to be exact, I will only include the fantasy books I have bought and read since. Here is my overview of the balances. In my previous update, I made a wild prediction that my fantasy TBR would consist of 86.4% of all my fantasy books, meaning that I would have read 31.6% of them. I emphasized that it was not a promise. In reality, I have now read 71 of a total of 253 fantasy books I bought since the beginning of this journey. In percentages, that comes down to 28.1% read versus 71.9% unread. That is definitely an improvement, but it's not the progress I had hoped to make. The good news is that I'm not in it for the numbers, but for my enjoyment of reading. And all the books I still want to read hold the promise of a great reading experience. That's worth a lot more than satisfying percentages. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.